Week 10 of the fantasy baseball season, and here's a few hitters I look to sell and trade this week. The first guy, Marcus Simmons of the Texas Rangers. So Simmons, what a weird season it's been for him so far. The first 2 months of the season, he had no home runs, but now he's really picked things up here over the last couple weeks. On the season, though, only 6 home runs, 24 RBIs, 31 runs scored, but 11 stolen bases, a .226 average, and a .288 on base. So his on base to batting average ain't that good. But over the last couple weeks here, 5 home runs, 7 RBIs, 5 stolen bases, a .321 average, and a .377 on base. So right here, Marcus Simmons, maybe with his new team, it took him time to get things going here. But he's been fluky as well with a 7-for-8 ball game in a doubleheader June 7th with 3 homers and 3 RBIs. So that game right there has made most of his stats for the season, especially in the home run category. So the last few games here for Simmons, June 5th versus Seattle, 2 for 5, a homer and RBI, 2 runs scored. June 7th, like I mentioned, in Cleveland in a doubleheader, 7 for 8, which is unheard of, 3 homers, 3 RBIs, 2 stolen bases, 4 runs scored. June 8th at the Guardians, 1 for 4. June 10th at the Chi-Sox, 0 for 4. June 11th at the White Sox, 2 for 4, run, 2 RBIs. June 12th at the White Sox, 0 for 6. June 13th at Houston in that one, 3 for 4 with a stolen base. So right here, Simmons, he's doing a lot of things. Great with the stolen bases, already 11 on the season, where he only had 14 all of last season. So he's off to a good start on that, is Marcus Simmons. But right now, I don't know what Simmons we're going to get. And like I mentioned, he's only picked it up over the last few weeks of the season, where he was one of the worst players in fantasy baseball for the first 2 months of the year. So right now, if you get a decent trade offer, I think I would trade Simmons because he's just too inconsistent. And who knows how he's going to finish the season when it's all said and done. The next guy, Byron Buxton of the Minnesota Twins. So Buxton, it's been a tale of 2 seasons here for him. He got off to a monster start the first month of the season. Then the second month of the season, he hasn't done much. And now over the last couple weeks here, he's picked things up once again on the season for Buxton, 18 home runs, only 32 RBIs, 37 runs scored, a stolen base, a .236 average, and a .313 on base. I know Buxton bats second in this Minnesota Twin lineup, and that's why the RBIs are low, obviously. But right here, he's been injury-prone throughout his career. And just like Marcus Simmons, it's been Jekyll and Hyde here for Byron Buxton. Last month, he didn't do anything, where he was hitting under 200 for the most part. And now he's picked things up over the last 2 weeks, 7 homers, 11 RBIs, and 12 runs scored. So with his injury-prone career so far, Buxton, and a guy who's very hot and cold right now, well, he's on a crazy hot streak. It's a perfect time to sell him high, and I think you could get a good batter and a pitcher as well in a deal for him. June 7th versus the Yankees, 1 for 4 with a run. June 8th versus the Yankees, 2 for 4, a homer, a rib, 2 runs scored. June 9th versus the Yankees, 2 for 4, 2 homers, 4 RBIs. June 10th versus the Rays, 2 for 5, 2 homers, 2 RBIs, 3 runs scored. June 11th, he sat that one out. June 12th versus Tampa Bay, 0 for 4. And June 13th at Seattle, 2 for 5, a homer, 2 RBIs, and 2 runs scored. So right here, he's on a home run tear with 7 homers in the last 2 weeks. And obviously, that's not sustainable, even though I know he's amongst the league leaders in the league with 18 home runs as Buxton. So right now, well, he's on a super white hot streak. This is a perfect time to sell him high and trade him. And I think you could get a decent package for him this week. The next guy I'd look to sell and trade this week's Garcia of the Texas Rangers. So Garcia, he's been a streaky hitter throughout his career. And last season he was streaky, but he did finish with 31 and 90, but did strike out 194 times. So far this season, 12 home runs, 41 RBIs, 33 runs scored, a .243 average, and a .290 on base, and already 69 strikeouts on the season here. But the last few weeks here, Garcia has been hot, 5 home runs, 12 RBIs. 5 stolen bases, 7 runs scored, a .321 average, and a .379 on base. So Garcia, he's a pretty good hitter, no doubt about it, but we know we're not going to get much batting average from him, only hitting the 240s last season. The last season as well, the downfall for him was the on base wasn't even at 300, but the RBIs and the home runs and even the stolen bases were solid. But right now, well, he's doing everything as Garcia in terms of batting average, home runs, RBIs, and stolen bases. It's a perfect time to sell him because this guy, he could put up a lot of stats in only 2 months of the season, and then the rest of the season not do much. So the last few games here for him, June 7th in a doubleheader at the Guardians, 0 for 8 with a stolen base. June 8th at the Guardians, 2 for 4. June 10th at the White Sox, 2 for 4, a homer, and RBI, stolen base. June 11th at the White Sox, 2 for 5, a homer, 3 ribs, 2 runs scored. June 12th at the White Sox, 3 for 4 with a run. And June 13th versus Houston, 1 for 4 in that ball game. So right here, I know he's in the heart of this Texas Ranger lineup. And I'm not saying dump him off or anything, but right now, while he's at peak value, I think you could get someone to overpay for Garcia, looking at the power numbers and the stolen bases as well. That is solid on the season with 9. So I will look to sell him this week. The next guy, Brandon Drury of the Cincinnati Reds. So when Drury signed in the offseason, I made a video about it. And I didn't even think this guy would have much of a role than a bench player, coming off the bench and starting maybe 2-3 times a week for this Red team. But right here, he's been a fantasy mainstay, especially with his versatility as well at second, third, and outfield. On the season here for Drury, 12 home runs, 33 RBIs, 39 runs scored already, a stolen base, a 276 average, and a 340 on base. So last season in a cup of coffee with the New York Mets, he was pretty decent as well. 4 homers, 14 RBIs, and only 84 at-bats with a 274 average. In the last couple weeks here for Drury, he's been on a tear. 4 homers, 7 RBIs, a stolen base, 15 runs scored, a 380 average, and a 426 on base. So right now, it's a great thing if you could pick up a player like Drury and then flip him with a guy obviously with more upside and more consistency throughout his career. And that's exactly what I would do in this case. And he's a guy that has a good sell-high point as well. We're qualifying at second, third, and outfield. So the last few games here for Drury, June 7th versus the D-backs, 1 for 2, a homer, 2 RBIs. June 9th versus Arizona, 2 for 4 with a run. June 10th at the Cards, 1 for 3. June 11th at the Cardinals, 1 for 4 with a run. June 12th at the Cardinals, 2 for 4 with a run. And June 13th at Arizona, 1 for 4 with a homer, 3 RBIs in that one. So he's hitting for power as Drury. Already 12 home runs on the season, like I mentioned. And hey, I know he plays in a bandbox in Cincinnati, but we'll see what the rest of the season has in store with about 100 games left here for Drury and the Reds. But right now, if you could get something good for him, a decent starting pitcher, I think I would pull the trigger, because he hasn't been good for many years since his Arizona Diamondback days. And he's bounced around the league, but maybe this season could be his breakout and reemergence with the Reds. But if I could get a good trade offer for him, for a guy I just picked up, and flip him, this would be the time to do it. And the fifth and final hitter I look to sell and trade this week here is Nelson Cruz of the Washington Nationals. So on the season, 7 home runs, 36 RBIs, 29 runs scored, 270 average, 349 on base, and 2 stolen bases. So Cruz, another guy with his new team this season, came out of the gate very slow, but the last month here, he's really turned it on. 3 home runs, 16 RBIs, 12 runs scored, 2 bags stolen, a 363 average, and a 431 on base. So right here, the only troubling thing for me here with Cruz is the power numbers are down. And like I mentioned, what Nelson Cruz are we going to get? He was hitting under 200 for the first 5-6 weeks of the season, but he's really turned things around over the last month, like I mentioned. Who knows? He might even be traded to a contender at the trade deadline, with the Nationals obviously one of the worst teams in the National League. June 7th at Miami, 1 for 3 with a rib. June 8th at Miami, 0 for 4. June 10th versus Milwaukee, 4 for 5, a homer, 3 RBIs, 2 runs scored. June 11th versus Milwaukee, 2 for 4, a homer, 3 RBIs. June 12th versus Milwaukee, 1 for 3. June 13th versus Atlanta, 2 for 5 with an RBI. And June 14th versus Atlanta, 1 for 4 in that one. So Cruz, he's hitting the baseball well. And this guy, he's just been one of the best power hitters in over the last decade. But I think the power might be down a little bit this season, even though if he does get traded to a contender, those numbers could go up. But right now, after slumping for a long time this season and finally getting things going, and him being only a utility player as well in fantasy baseball, which ain't all that great, I think it's a perfect time to sell Nelson Cruz, because he definitely could go the other way once again and struggle. So you don't know what you're going to get from him 100%. So that's a few hitters I look to sell and trade here for Week 10 of the fantasy baseball season.